everyone, and welcome back to the channel where your likes, comments, and subs are always greatly appreciated. Speaking of comments, I've received a bunch of them for the Zoom R20 multi-track recorder. People have, left a lot of positive feedback, but they've also left a lot of questions. I've done my best to try to get to as many questions as possible. So if you have extra questions for this video, please leave them at the bottom, and I will try to respond to them. But one of the main questions that I've seen pop up in multiple locations at multiple times from different people is, can you use a MIDI controller to lay down a synth drum track? And the answer is, yeah, you can. Secondary question then is, can you use pads of a MIDI controller to lay down a synth drum track on the Zoom R20 using its built-in drum kit sounds? The answer to that one's a little bit more complicated. It's kind of, sort of, yes, but it's going to be dependent upon what kind of MIDI controller you have and the capabilities of that controller and options. So in order to hook up a MIDI controller and test this out, you're going to have to dig into the settings of the Zoom R20 a little bit, and you'll hook up your controller through USB, because that's what it has, is a USB-C port on the side here. For my MIDI controller today, I'm going to use my AKAI MPK Mini Play. This is a 25-key MIDI controller that also has 8 pads. This variant of the MPK Mini has a built-in speaker, so you trade in some of the knobs that you'll have on, like, I think it's the MK3. It doesn't have that as many knobs as that, but it does have a built-in speaker. Also has built-in synth sounds and drum sounds, so I can play this as a keyboard using the speaker or the headphone jack as a standalone device, and I don't need a DAW, and I don't need something like the R20 that I could play it through. But in this case, you still can. You can use its MIDI capabilities. It has MIDI out via USB Type B port, and you can power it with batteries, so it'll run off of a few AA batteries for being a standalone device. But I have this set over to USB, so it can receive USB power from the R20, and we could power it that way. Any MIDI controller that I think will operate on like 500 milliamps should be able to work by receiving power from the R20. So in order to hook that up, you need to have the right cords. I have a USB Type B at the end of this cord. We'll use that to connect the Mini Play. And then on the other side of that cable is a USB Type C jack, and that's going to go on the side of the R20. You plug it in, and you may notice that you don't have any power for the controller, and that's because you have to dive into the settings and let it know that you have a MIDI controller hooked up. I will zoom into the Zoom R20 here so you can see the screen a little bit better. Okay, so when you're in the project screen, hit the setting icon, scroll down a little bit, go to USB MIDI keyboard, you'll turn that on. All right, should be good to go, right? Well, my MIDI controller, you can see, still does not have any power. If you get this, this is actually pretty normal, don't freak out. All you have to do is open up a project. So if you have a project that you already created, you created a new project, doesn't matter. I'm gonna open up this one, which is an empty project. Once you do that and you're into the project, now you'll notice that your MIDI controller is receiving power, and it should work. Right now, I'm selected on track 1. Track 1 is set for an audio track. If we want to lay down some sort of drums here, we've got 2 options. One, you could hit the drum icon. It'll turn track 1 into a stereo link track 1 with 2. And you can load in WAV file loops that are preloaded onto the R20 and build up your rhythm track that way. But you're really going to be confined to whatever the R20 has in terms of WAV file drum rhythm samples. But what we want to do today is use the synth track. So if we use the synth track here by hitting the piano icon on the screen there, so you can see track 1 is ready to go with the piano icon, and now we have a synth track that we can control with our MIDI keyboard. You have the different sounds that you can select from by going to this file folder icon, and there are 18 different synth voices. Number 19 is the drum kit, so that's what we're interested in today. I'm going to hit the drum kit there. Okay, so now we're all preloaded, ready to go. for a drum kit. I'm going to zoom out so we can see a little bit more of the desk with the R20 and the controller. So when you have the controller activated now for the drum track, you can use the different notes to play on the keys to play the different drum sounds. Now these different notes correspond to some of the different drum kit sounds. In particular for this, for the way that my default settings are for the controller, I do have to lower it by an octave. And now I can get a full layout of different types of drum sounds. So you got your kicks, your snares, toms, and then some cymbals. It's not that extensive. You know, it is obviously very limited in terms of the number of sounds and voices that you get, at least with version 1.0 of the R20. But at least you have something that you can play around with and lay down a rhythm track. So yes, you can use a MIDI controller to lay down a drum track. You could do it, you know, relatively easy. Can you use the pads? That's a different question. So for my mini play, I've got 8 pads and a pad bank A and B. I'm on A right now, and you'll notice that my pads are not doing anything. They're not activating or triggering any of the drum sounds. What I can do is switch this thing up to pad bank B, and now when I do that, some of the pads will deliver a MIDI signal that'll be recognized and actually play a drum sound, but these pads do not. So right now for my default settings for the mini play on pad bank B, I can only use these 5 pads, and so I've got, I think, 2 kicks, 2 snares, and kind of like a clapping sound, and that's it. So pretty limited. If you can change the notes that your pads are sending out via MIDI to the R20, and you've got that flexibility and versatility on your controller, then you can absolutely use, you know, all the finger pads that you want for drumming purposes on the R20. But when you are sort of stuck with a controller like this, when I'm using it with a DAW, it's no big deal. I can, you know, just on a DAW, essentially, for the most part, you can kind of like drag and drop things onto the pads and it'll play whatever sample that you have then set to trigger with the pad. But for this, I can't find a way to change up what notes the pads send to the R20 and have it. So that's really got to be completely on the controller itself and not in the software in the R20. The R20, as far as I know, cannot learn what you're sending here from the pads in there to lay down a drum track. That's just not how it's going to work. But these pads, though, they are velocity sensitive at least. So if I've got you can see you do have some dynamic range. It's not, you know, this crazy wide dynamic range that you might hope for, but it's not bad. You do have some level of control with the velocity sensitivity. I can hit this button here for full levels. This way I always get the full sound. Whenever I hit the pads, that works as well. So it will send, you know, volume level 127, as opposed to I could turn that off and then try to deliver something that, you know, 15, 20, 25. So you could deliver something that's a lot quieter. You can also, you know, lay down a track. In order to lay down a drum track, super easy. Just arm the track for track 1 and then hit record. And done. So it does work. I can go in there and maybe I'll just not arm the track anymore, and I can delete the track. The other thing that you can do, though, is you can layer this up with different effects that the R20 has built in. I will zoom into the screen one more time so you could see some of these effects. So once you have your track selected, we want track 1, that's where our synth track is. You would touch whatever the number is, or in this case, touch the piano right there for track 1. You'll get an option for track settings up at the top. You touch that, and then scroll through towards the bottom. You have send effect. If I click that, right now it's send hall 3, so it's like a hall reverb, and we just need to increase the send level. So we can do that, have a little reverb now on our drums. See what else we got for different effects. I think there's like 40 preloaded effects, and then there's some empty spaces that you could make your own effects. So put on some kind of compression delay. That's kind of wild. So you can have some fun with it, playing around with the settings. So the answer is yes, you can finger drum with some pads on your MIDI controller, but it's really going to be dependent upon your MIDI controller and its ability to learn or your program in the different notes to the pads. So this way you could send the right note to the R20. But you can play with the keys of your MIDI controller. It will work just fine with that, no problem, because you could just shift around, find the octave where you've got all of the different drum sounds loaded up and corresponding to those different notes. So it's pretty easy to do. It is a little bit limited, obviously, with the number of sounds that you can generate, at least with version 1.0 of the software, which this is on right now. Hopefully Zoom comes out with a firmware update and has more expansive controls, different sounds. I would love to see that incorporated into the R20, but at least it gives you something that not all multi-track recorders have, and that is MIDI level control. And then once you do lay down a MIDI track, you can go into the MIDI grid and actually edit that if you want. So if I hit record here, all right, laid down my quick track. You can jump in and see the MIDI grid of your notes. So once your notes are laid down for your track, your region is there. You just select it by touching it and then touch that scissor icon. Scroll through and there they are. You could find your MIDI notes, and then you could use the different sort of edit buttons up here to move things around or change the length. You could add in different notes as well. So you could sort of sequence things in there. And I've also posted a video on kind of using just the touchscreen for MIDI editing purposes. You could look that up, but all those rules will apply to a drum track as well. So you do have some extra features if you do lay it down in MIDI. You're really only limited to the sounds that the R20 has. Otherwise, it would be a pretty cool device to be able to do a little bit of MIDI editing straight here on your multi-track recorder, and then you could lay down your different synth tracks or your guitar tracks that you might have and have that extra flexibility. So that's all I wanted to cover for this video today, and show you that you can use a MIDI controller to lay down some rhythm tracks, and you can, depending on your controller, use the finger drumming pads as well. So if you've got any extra kind of ideas for other videos or different comments, extra questions, I'll try to get to all of those if you leave them at the bottom of this video in a timely fashion. But other than that, hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you around next time. Thank you.